Forbes recently interviewed Todd McFarlane. McFarlane launched a Kickstarter campaign for a reissue of the original Spawn figure and comic book. The interview also touched on the current situation in comics, namely that everything is shut down because
China is asshole!
McFarlane has an interesting take on this, and given his place in the industry, he's removed yet knowledgeable enough to hit some of the key insights that will sound very familiar. Quote, "The fact is, we have to do something. Things have changed in our industry, obviously, both on the toy side and the comic side. No new comics are coming out. That's a really dangerous situation, not just for us, but for any consumer industry that relies on established customer habits. If you give your customer a chance to break their habit, they might not come back. And this is a real problem, and one of the reasons why people keep reminding those working in comics that the fans are customers. It can take weeks or months to form a habit, but it only takes a day to break one. As a business relying on a constant influx of customers, you never want a situation where you lose traffic. Telling people not to buy your books will lose traffic, just like having the stores, publishers, and distributors shut down." He goes on to say, quote, "I understand how we got here and why we're at a standstill. But even if the distributor, Diamond, is down, we can't just sit here and do nothing. So I'm trying to do something. Remember, even if we're not going to stores or movies right now, geeks will always be geeks. So we need to find ways to keep what we do on the minds of customers however we can." Unfortunately, the industry as a whole really isn't doing that. You've got Jim Lee and Art Adams and a few others doing auctions, a handful of digital releases by Marvel and DC, and smaller publishers like Alterna Comics continuing to provide comics directly from their website. But overall, there's nothing really keeping comics in the minds of fans. Posting lots of artwork is great, but you're losing out on people binge watching shows and movies or playing video games. I mean, I'm making this video now so I can spend the entire weekend playing Final Fantasy VII. What could have helped is the very thing I'm doing right now, making videos. Heat the Man Skyver started a channel drawing and doing reviews. Jim Lee has a channel about drawing. A number of artists and writers have channels as well, and this would be the time to build on that. Of course, since a number of comic book creators have behaved poorly on social media, attacking the very people who would watch their videos, some of them may get negative comments or even brigaded. Don't do that, by the way. And now they see why it's not a good idea to attack the fan base and tell them you don't need them. So when asked how this compares to the collapse in the 90s, McFarlane said, quote, "Look, we've had downturns. We lost a lot of customers in the 90s. This is different. Now we have 0 customers and 0 new printed comics. As an industry, we've never started at a 0 before. It's completely unprecedented, and we don't know where it's going or when it will end. We can try to save retail all we want, but it's tough if consumers can't go to stores. Everything needs demand. What's the demand going to be once we open up? Will people be more conservative about spending? Will they decide they can live without comics for 3 or 4 months, so maybe they don't need to spend their money on them? Or some people have money and want to buy new stuff, but the stores are out of business. There are a lot of unknowns. This too is something being overlooked by the industry. Look at what's trended on social media in the last month. More people shared a video about an audience overreacting to Endgame than will ever read an Avengers comic. People seem content to get their entertainment from other mediums, and once the shutdowns are over, people aren't going to run back to most stores to buy things, let alone to buy comics. So the question is, how do you get people to come back into comics? McFarlane says that whatever is done needs to be consistent across the industry, not just each company saying they'll do something, but the industry as a whole, at least the top 4, doing the same thing together. Quote, "If they put me in charge, and no one wants that to understand, here's what I'd do. I'd take Image, Dark Horse, Marvel, and DC, the top 90% of the market, and make a message from the 4 of us as a unified front. One message. At the very least, I'd say that. Surely among the leaders, we can throw in 10 new comics as free digital downloads. Top titles, the ones people really want to read. We can afford it. It doesn't necessarily help the retailers, but we can't allow customers to lose that exercise of being geeks, of getting their regular dose to keep their geekiness going with comics instead of moving on to some other thing like streaming video or gaming, because they will. We need to engage people in comics, and if we're not doing new comics, I don't get how we can keep them interested." You can already hear retailers screaming about this, but he has a point. The publishers are not really stopped by the shutdown. Many comics are made digitally, and those that aren't are scanned so that they can be colored and lettered. So the process is largely digital. These files can be uploaded to a cloud service, packaged as PDFs or whatever format Comixology uses, and given to the customers directly. Yes, this cuts out the retailers, but it keeps the publishers alive and the fan base engaged. Every fan isn't going to read digital comics, but enough will that it could at least keep some interest going. As for the other response, McFarlane says, quote, people say, do they have to be free? Couldn't they be 99 cents? And for me, the answer is yes, free. We've done okay. We can afford to give something back. And this is true. Even if the companies were operating at a loss, they can give away a few free comics that people want to read. It'll keep the fan base interested. But the key issue here is putting out books people want, not these vanity projects we've seen in recent years, and yes, I'm including Hickman's Plant People X-Men. These have to be the type of stories that got people into comics in the first place, not a cerebral 144 chapter story that requires 60 years of X-Men history to follow, and definitely not another book with a shaved head, brown-skinned lesbian who's perfect at everything. Bring back the entertainment. This, not this. Where McFarlane loses me is here, quote, then, once this is over, we can do 3 to 5 events to give people a reason to get back into stores. We can coordinate the timing for once, so each company gets a turn in the spotlight. Maybe some cross-company stuff to make it sexy. Maybe the industry will be diminished. It depends on how long it goes. It's unknown. But whatever is left is a new norm. We'll need to adjust and work from there. I think people have event fatigue. The events have no weight anymore. Everything gets retconned in a couple of years, the status quo is never really established, and then it starts all over again. I mean, Marvel's got 3 events for 2020, Outlawed, Empire, and Swords of X, and I don't know anyone who's remotely excited about those. DC's 5G event, which would replace all the characters with new ones, was already shaping up to alienate people and is probably a major reason why Dan DiDio got fired. I do think, however, the idea of companies working together to let each one get time in the spotlight is an okay idea, as long as it applies to small publishers as well. We don't want to alienate those publishers because they're really the ones who can disappear overnight. Of course, all this hinges on companies working together, and I don't see that happening. Unfortunately, this may have to be done on a publisher-by-publisher level, and that means the people pushing DC's 5G event have to go, and the people pushing the SJW comics at Marvel have to go. I don't think the creators necessarily have to go, but the decision makers, like Sana Amanat and CB Cebulski, yeah, they gotta go. Marvel and DC in particular need to streamline their titles down to the biggest draws. Any vanity projects should either be made digital only or cancelled. I'm thinking no more than 30 titles from each company, at least for a year or two. I also think they need to stop rotating creative teams, stop relaunching titles every 3 days, get back to some actual continuity within their shared universes, and focus on story over politics. Marvel might be the one exception for events, because I think the event they need is a total reboot. They're due. The sliding timescale is too stretched now. Otherwise, distill the lines down to the most profitable books, and go from there. Either way, the industry is gonna take a hit. There will be stores that close, or in this case, never reopen. There will be publishers that fold. There will be artists and writers that never get to finish their books. I think most of the industry will be fine, but don't be surprised if 10 or 20% of retailers, publishers, and creators disappear. And don't be surprised if Diamond, the main comic book distributor, closes. That's a very real possibility. Like Scar said, be prepared. If you'd done that in the first place, you wouldn't be in dire straits right now. But what do I know? I'm just some guy.